A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, giving all honor, all praises, and all glory to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Akakadash, double honors to the apostles and the elders, great millstone, for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Zaruquai, back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to cover this situation in regards to the U.S. and Venezuela and kind of offer more of a Caribbean um, perspective as well, in doing so, because growing up in the Caribbean, basically, Venezuela was one of those countries that we had essentially strong ties to. So prior to the president Maduro being in office, there was a president back then known as Hugo Chavez, and during his administration, at that time, the different Caribbean islands, various different Caribbean, as well as the one I'm from called Grenada. You had others such as Barbados, Antigua, a few others as well. They had a joint partnership known as Petro-Carib. And Petro-Carib was essentially like a joint initiative with the different Caribbean islands along with Venezuela, where, the different Caribbean islands essentially were to be able to purchase, oil, and it was kind of like a collective agreement, within, Jake essentially doing business, amongst themselves, right? And, for brothers who don't know, Venezuela has lots of reserves of oil, right? And so that's pretty much the one of the relationships that the so-called Venezuelan government at that time. They had different relations with other Caribbean islands to be able to purchase oil and help their economies, right? So that was a very big thing back then, and I think ever since the 2019, it's no longer, I believe it ceased to exist now, right? It no longer is actually in effect. But one of the points I really wanted to hit as well, with this lesson is that Esau is very threatened, when essentially you have our people, when you're not essentially relying on him, right? You kind of have to, and I guess that also leads to the curses as well. As a matter of fact, I think I'll start off with that, you know, because that's one of the curses of us as a people. Um, I don't know if I had that written down, but I guess I'll just go to it, you know. Just bear with me. Let me just open this. This is this is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verse 48, and it says, "And thou shalt serve thine enemies, which the Lord Yahweh shall send thee against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee." Right? So, our people would have to go to our enemies for the want of all things, right? And you start to continue to see this play out, in effect, and this also includes the tribes of the Northern Kingdom, the so-called Latin and Native American tribes as well, right? So the point is, and that also plays out with other different Caribbean islands, because what you have is Esau is basically within your own countries extracting the resources. And imagine you're situated on those different islands, and every island kind of has like its own natural export. Like some islands excel in certain other things more than others. Puerto Rico is more known for, its rich soil. I think they grow like cassava and a lot of ground provision, right? But they also suffer from those exact same curses, right? You have, like, for example, like where I'm from, Grenada, they're more excel in when it comes to like spices and tourism. you know um Guyana also shares a bit of portion of that, like oil. Like every island kind of has like its own, essentially it's like its own thing where they kind of export it, right? But our people don't reap the benefits of those different complete exports. So for example, if I use tourism as an example, what you would have is a lot of these other nations, they would come to the different islands, and then they would set up shop. They might have like their own, whether it might be own restaurant or own hotels, and basically it's on the island as it operating as a business. But they're less likely to hire the locals, so they're less likely to hire our own people. And even if they hire our own people, you're not actually reaping the benefits thereof, because you're not an owner. You're not somebody who actually has the last say, right? So they're basically just using the resources, and using the space that that they hold on to, and basically all those riches, our people don't actually reap the benefit of that. So that essentially is a curse onto our people, right? And this is it's the same thing, playing out with what's it called, Venezuela. Like Venezuela has that rich amount of oil, right? But they don't actually, you have the people essentially are in an impoverished state. You're essentially like the parable, like when you read about the parable of Lazarus and the rich man. Our people are the in the state of Lazarus, where you're basically just eating the crumbs off the master's table. And the rich man, he's dressed very well. He's not as trouble as other men. Esau is very, he has the fatness of the earth, right? And this is the way he's getting it, is through that sword, right? So let me actually get that, and I'll get a little bit more on, because I had a quick article I just wanted to read, real quick. Let me go to Genesis 27. Okay, this is Genesis chapter 27, verse 38, and I'll read down. And it says, And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven, and from above. And it says, And that by thy sword thou shalt live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt have the dominion, thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. Right? So, Esau, this is his blessing. And Esau, his descendants are known as the Edomites. So they will rule, and they will conquer using that blessing. And this is exactly what you see, playing out here as well. You're starting to see, you will begin continuing to see that Esau lives by this particular blessing. And this is one of the things that America strongly prides themselves in when it comes to, the chip on their shoulder. They have a chip on their shoulder, where, because they strongly boast themselves in the military. They strongly, they pride themselves. It's like as the eagle. That's basically, it's just a very, very macho, very conquering type of nation, right? They don't care about the welfare of the poor, and then they even oppress your own, they even oppress their own people as well. They don't care about their own people, right? So they hoard a lot of these different riches, right? They go out, they get it for themselves, and they don't care about the welfare of you Israelites, and that's something you guys, our people don't seem to still understand, and they don't even care about their own people, right? So I wanted to read this real quick on NBC News. Let's see if I can find it real quick. It's a quick, short, snippet of an article that came across, and it says Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. capture of Maduro isn't a war against Venezuela. And I would disagree with that. It's more of essentially an ideological war, like back in the the Cold War era. So here's what the article goes into. And it says Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Sunday that the goal of the U.S. military operation that led the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro on Saturday was primarily halted drug trafficking into the U.S. and holding elections in Venezuela would be premature at this point. It says we care about elections, we care about democracy, we care about all that, but no. But the number one thing we care about is the safety and security of the well-being and the prosperity of the United States, right? So this is essentially Satan presenting himself as the angel of light. He's presenting himself as somebody who actually cares for the people, but and with his intent, his sneaky intent, his mind is to actually try and acquire the resources, because it's the same playbook. It's the same playbook they did with what was that country called? Libya, right? Because at that time you had Gaddafi. He wanted to get away from that U.S. dominant Western influence and actually be able to help their own people, right? To be able to create something of substance, not being reliant upon upon essentially the West, right? So continuing on here, and if you look at the after effects thereof, when you look at the country of Libya, prior to Gaddafi, and then even after Gaddafi, like you look at the state of the way the country is now and the way the country was before, it's completely different night and day, right? It's not the same as it used to, and this is the same rhetoric, the same mindset that they have, right? So here it says, here's what we're going to focus on first and foremost here. He said, meet the press. He made comments after Donald Trump announced U.S. military forces of the capturing of the nation's leader and his wife, right? So it says there's no war, but there's more of an ideological war, right, as well. Let me see here. I'm just going to read this here. And it says that, there is no war against drug trafficking organizations, not the war against Venezuela. The Secretary of the State added his comments mirrored those he made alongside the president and the other Trump administration officials on Saturday's press conference, maintaining that there are strikes on Venezuela to capture Maduro and is simply a law enforcement action and not a state of war. So it says, so Trump told the reporters, he said, we're not afraid of boots on the ground, but for now, there are no members of the U.S. military in Venezuela, right? So, they're kind of just using the drug situation as basically as a scapegoat, as a cop out, for what they really want is that same natural resource, to making sure that the other nations are in compliant to that same mindset, that same mindset when it comes to going back to democracy, right? It's the same thing they did in where I'm from as well, in Grenada, because prior to the 2000s, the U.S. had its own invasion upon Grenada, back in the 1980s, And it was a similar mindset because at that time, you had a lot of those close relations between Grenada, and you had Cuba, and a lot of so-called Cubans used to come onto the island to be able to have employment and be able to work a lot on the infrastructure. So, for example, they worked a lot on the airport to develop the airport, that is currently still used today. But you know, you see how America is. America is basically like one of those countries where when you're not reliant on them, and when Jake is kind of working together, without the breath, obviously, because these, they do these things and they come together, without understanding who they are as a people, right? But when they come together like that, they realize it leaves America kind of shaking in their boots, because it's a fearful thing when our people come together like that in terms of that unity, right? you know Remember when you read the book of what was it, I think it was Judith. They understood that when we were in alignment with our power, they understood that Jake was unstoppable. The Lord Yahweh Bashim Shah would fight for us when we were in alignment with Him, but when we were transgressing, it would be essentially against us, right? So let me get Habakkuk to kind of speak on this point. I'm kind of going back and forth in terms of hitting a couple points, but where was I? This is Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 5. And it says, Yea, also, because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hell, and he is as death and cannot be satisfied, but unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Right. So this is the way how Esau functions. So, you know, and he pushed that wine. So he pushes a lot of those different philosophies. When you don't get countries to kind of comply into being the way that you want them, you make sure you install a essentially a leader there that's going to actually maintain a certain type of rhetoric and certain type of mindset that is in congruence with the American government. That's the mindset of how he operates. So, continuing on, let me read it again. And it says, He is a proud man and neither keepeth at home. So, he's always in these other countries' businesses, and like, look at the state of your own country. And this is the thing, right? Because like you're going and performing all these different task forces and going into these other countries. This is why a lot of countries don't like America. This is a very strong reason why, because you're always interfering into the affairs of these other nations, right? And he's somebody who cannot be satisfied, so he's always heaping all these different resources onto him, right? But you don't even know how to manage that properly, right? So I want to read something here. Let me go to Jeremiah. Because I spoke about the resources, and it says here, Jeremiah 49, verse 9, and it says, If grape gatherers come unto thee, would they not leave some gleaning grapes? If thieves by night, they will destroy until they have enough. But I have made Esau bare, I have uncovered his secret places, and he is not able to hide himself. His seed is spoiled, and his brethren and his neighbors, and he is not. So the first portion, when you're going to, gather grape gatherers and gleaning grapes, within our culture, we have particular laws in regards to having, when you have substance, when you have land, when you have like, for example, like a vineyard or something. When you have a vineyard, for example, you know, I'm speaking kind of like more like in terms of like in the ancient times, when we were in the land, we received the land, different tribes have their, their substance, right? We're chilling, right? Back in those days, one of our customs was you don't reap the entire corners of that land. So you essentially, okay, if you have like a vineyard, you're not going to gather every single crop, tree, or harvest, every single out of every single like crop out of that, that particular vineyard. What you will do is you will leave a certain amount and a certain portion for those who are less well off. So you might have had, Israelites that were sojourning in the land, um, or you might have had a woman, like a widow, for example, who lost her husband, or you might have had situations where children, they lost their parents and they don't have anyone to care for them. In those situations, you have some substance essentially put aside for somebody who is less fortunate, you know. But Esau is not that type of person. That's why I'm kind of reading this. Kind of want to explain the ins and outs of, the importance of the law, and how essentially Esau doesn't keep the ways of the Heavenly Father, right? And that's very, very important because it shows that you actually manage the resources that are actually given to you. So it shows even more, to another extent as well, that he's not a good steward. He's not somebody who actually cares for the welfare of you people, and you Israelites need to understand that, you know. um, where was I? Let me get the law just for edification. Kind of branching off a little bit here, but just to understand that, you know, just to understand the importance of when we have substance, right? This is Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9. And it says, "And when ye reap the harvest of the land, ye shall not wholly reap the corners of thy field, neither thou shalt gather the gleanings of thy harvest. Thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither thou shalt gather every grape out of the vineyard." So don't gather everything that, okay, you have some substance, you leave some substance aside, put aside for those who are a little bit less fortunate than you. Thou shalt leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord Yahweh, thy power, your power, I'm sorry, right? So this is a mindset to actually making sure that, other people they have some substance put aside for them. That's in our law, and it forces you to be considerate. And Esau is not that type of person. He's essentially a what you might call is like a niggard. So he's hoarding a lot of these, and this is one of the reasons, I'm sorry, not reasons, but this is one of the things that he does, that he hoards the resources for himself, right? So this is another example of that. Going back to the main point of Esau going into Venezuela, and they want that oil for themselves, right? It's the same playbook. It's nothing original, man. He's not somebody who's original. He's just doing the same thing, you know. Um, Before I go to Sirach, I wanted to read. There's something I was reading recently. One second. Okay, I can't find it at the moment. But basically, in layman's terms, what I just wanted to explain was that, during the Cold War era, that there was essentially an ideological warfare between, you had Russia and then you had the U.S., right? And basically, where I'm from, Grenada, they got caught up in the midst of that, and America basically did the exact same thing, right? And using the university at the time, because basically it's an American university, to basically just justify coming in and basically setting up their own that democracy, right? Setting up that their own democracy. So this is why a lot of these countries, they've drunken of that wine, right? And this is why, or a lot of the reasons why these nations are mad, because they want to actually keep their own customs, but a lot of these nations wander after America and this conglomerate, this beast Roman, this revised Roman beast system, where they follow after these different particular ways, and thinking that this in these ways are thinking are conducive to life, but they're not. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted to just make that point real quick, because that's the nature of what Esau does, right? So because back then you had a lot of Israelites from Cuba. We had strong relations with Cuba at that time, right? So I just wanted to make that quick point, because he does the same thing, right? He's not he's not original. This is Micah 2:2, and it says, "And they covet fields." I'll start off verse 1 actually, and it says, "And woe unto them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds, when the morning is like they practice it, because it is in the power of their hand. They covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away, and they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage." So this is part of the oppression, that occurs from the nature of these people, because they're hoarding all the resources for themselves, and they don't actually, they're just not good stewards, right? So they end up oppressing a lot of the people. So another good example was, in Nigeria, you had the whole situation with Shell, and Shell went in, and Shell was using the Nigerian military as basically as a strong arm, because the people, they had, they were using and extracting a lot of those oil, the same playbook, right? And they left, I forgot which portion it's called in Nigeria, but they left that region in Nigeria, and it's a wasteland now. And this is what Esau does. Here it is. Where is it? Um, Revelation 6. Revelation 6:4, and it says, "And they went out another horse that was red, and power was given unto him that sat thereon to take peace from the earth, and they shall kill one another, and there was given unto him a great sword," right? So this is the way Esau fights. This is his blessing, right? And he uses that power to basically oppress our people, through these different facets. So it could be very something as minor as sanctions, but actually going into your country and establishing, their own puppet, right, to push forth their own agenda, while they extract a lot of the resources and profit their own nations, right? So that's pretty much it. I kind of wanted to cover that, because you know it's a very, very I guess interesting time we're living in. And Esau he's just doing the same thing, and he's making a lot more enemies for himself, when he does this, right? And they present themselves as the angel of light by masquerading like they care about democracy and freedom, and the welfare of the people. And then when you look at the results thereof, it shows that you're doing a lot more harm than good. Yahushua said, a tree is known by its fruits. And when you go into that word fruit, it goes into works and deeds. And this is the works thereof. They don't have works that actually exemplify a nation that actually cares about the welfare of the earth and the people, right? So anyways, I'll leave the lesson there, but Lord's will, this lesson was edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to you. How about Shai? Until next time, I say shalom.